it's time again to do a video. So where to begin? I could say that beforehand that I found that just a short pause and just recover in some sense, just lying down, and could be just 5 minutes, but 15 minutes just take not necessarily a nap, but just resting could be very fruitful. And I've found, especially in times when the harder you push yourself, the more important those times become. And I'm on the verge of being in need of that right now. So if perhaps it's not impossible that I will end in, but could also be the case that I will be going on for quite a long time. I have no end in mind here really, other than doing this very fruitful exercise. So where to begin? I've thought a lot about this general sort of, I mentioned many topics like sort of rational, investigate what you're doing on a daily basis, and also the fruitfulness of being focused on a task for a prolonged period of time, which is not always, it does not always work, because sometimes you're just stuck and then you have to quit and so forth. But it's still like, sometimes I've thought, and I've got reminded about that when I heard about some scientists and researchers, like I think, I know it was Thomas Edison or Einstein, or no, it was probably not Einstein, but anyway, that found that, I think I perhaps mentioned it, that they didn't want to be awake for 16 or 18 hours. They made something drastically different. They make sure to be perhaps awake for more than 24 hours and then slept, so they their days were completely whacked, but they were longer just because they had to go deep enough in thought in consistency in order for new things to develop. So that continuity is perhaps supported memories of, and you could, for example, take the counter position that is say, well, if you sleep, you synthesize or process your memories. So that's, you need that. And that's perhaps even more important that prolonged. But anyway, that's just a rabbit hole. I don't want to go down there now, but in general, my main thing here is that in connection to contemplating what you're doing with your day and sort of evaluating opportunity cost, should I focus that or that? And also a third thing I want to bring up in relation to this, the ability, just the awareness of thinking, which is something I do very often. I just taking a step back and thinking, something that you can become very good at if you're practicing meditation, but just thinking, what am I thinking about? And even more, the crucial part here, to think that rationality is what's going to take me forward in this situation where I am right now. Sometimes we so often jump to conclusions about what to think about, so we don't think. The better question is to think or ask, what's rational for me to focus on now? And then lots of answers come up to mind. It's easy to just, usually perhaps I get some ideas, and as often as I do, when I do this practice, because usually I'm just lost in my mind, and I perhaps think about well, I think about what you think, what you should think about, but I don't always ask that second question, what's just rational to think about right now, and even when that happens, I usually grab the first or second or third answer, or perhaps I'm better at sorting this out, but just that initial focus is, I think, very fruitful. But you also have to go deeper, and here comes in the thing about prolonged time for doing things. You don't have to force yourself to do it, but you need to have that in uninterrupted continuity. Like, for example, cooking meals and eating is for me something that I feel it just interrupts everything. And I think I just actually finished Einstein's biography by Walter Isaacson. It's quite a popular one right now, this one. Just finished it. I read perhaps 60, 70, 65% earlier, a month ago or two. But now, last week or 2 weeks, I've read the rest. And there, I think it was Einstein who said that, I think it was from the book, that it was so what he would have been able to accomplish if he didn't have to eat all the time. And it really takes a lot of time, but it's also pleasurable for sure. So I always eat and work simultaneously, at least like when I'm on my own. Why shouldn't I? And also if I have some pleasurable thing I do, which is just looking at something, or like a TV series, which I don't try to do too much of. But when I do, I usually eat at the same time. Anyway, that prolonged focus, like for example what I'm doing now and what I've been doing many of these videos, that's really a key important thing, I think, to that's something I've been really fruitful when I have these prolonged, quite long discussions with myself, trying to figure things out. But so where should I start here? What is the right question to ask? What is rational for me to focus on right now? And I think a broader sort of scope of perhaps my situation in relation to, and this is an idea that I've been on at for perhaps last 6 months now and then, although I forgot it. But again, I've been trying to think, what is rationally something that I should focus on? What is rational something that incorporates academic ideas and so forth in my life? What is that? And one answer is, of course, which I've already brought up, that prolonged, or well, that's perhaps not academic ideas, but something I believe in anyway. But more generally, what should I do with my time, considering all the academic ideas that I know about? And in one way it feels overwhelming to do it here and now, but I guess I just have to start, and it's quite a big project to get sure about. And things that, by the way, it can be very illuminating, and even being attentive to always, you almost become in awe. And if you contemplate sort of like evolution, when I actually think of myself as an ape, I'm like sort of monkey, a primate who goes back and forth here, talking to myself, which becomes quite funny, but it's also illuminating to understand that's actually the case as far as we know. But always also in connection to all biology and chemistry and physics, that's is sort of the foundation for all this, and the connection in sort of a reductionist fashion. That's it's, and by the way, it's also, if I can incorporate in this conversation about where I am, and it's not only academic ideas but also attitudes and stoicism and like for example from Seneca or Marcus Aurelius principles, where like for example Marcus Aurelius, one principle he has is that anything that happens that you perceive as bad is potentially just something you can just, it's not bad really, it's just how you perceive it, and that everything in nature has its process, and just watching it, and it's, you shouldn't be surprised that something bad happens to you. You should be expecting it actually to happen, and that just everything is just part of nature. And his particular thing that I mentioned or remember is that he said that consider all how small a glimpse of time this is in compared to eternity and all that's been on the earth and now in the universe and so forth, and how tiny you are and your place, your room and your home in comparison to the whole wide world. That gives you perspective. And so those type of, when that's connected to evolution, and you could think of it in terms of evolution and how you're just ape or a primate walking back and forth talking to yourself, but perhaps to other people as well. But that's, and how how we are so socially dependent that we need to talk in order to feel well or talk with other people, that we're so still so animalish kind of, but to spark that awe for mysteries, and it's something that I definitely got reminded of when I read Einstein. He is really into that. He's religious in his own sense, even though we don't believe in the usual gods described by. He don't believe in a personal God. He says he believes in a mystery of universe, sort of governed by simplicity of laws and so forth. But if I want to go back to me here right now, in order to understand myself, we can be bringing up chemistry, evolution, psychology, of course, psychology and psychological biases that I've been harping about on these videos, which I think are extremely helpful. And also something else that pops up in my mind is Peter Thiel's. He talks about René Girard's theory about mimicking, that we mimic each other and each other's desires, and that's also a thought that really helps me oftentimes to feeling more sort of independent in thought, and just being proud of that I actually am not just a victim of what I've been exposed to, even though we are to some degree very much that, but thinking for yourself and just mimicking, because that theory, René Girardian theory, that Peter Thiel likes so much, is basically about that we, all the desires that we have is basically just mimicking other people's desires, and the scapegoat mechanism and so forth. And I just bring that up in connection to this because I think it's interesting, and it's of course what in part that is basically this, what Munger calls social proof in psychology. And you, just because everyone else does it, you think it's right. And as Peter Thiel says, you have to know when the wisdom of crowds become the madness of crowds, and that's not an easy things to judge. And but okay, so it is quite common. I probably try to get more focused, but I want to bring as much things into consideration as possible here. And by the way, again diverging, but I think it's important to understand that I have a tendency to be a perfectionist, and I think it is a good thing in general. If you're really ambitious to do something really, really right, then you want to take into consideration as many things as possible that is, of course, fruitful for what you're doing. And of course, there's a trade-off. If you try to grasp too much, you probably don't get to a synthesis close enough. But I think it's better to err on the side of taking too much in relation to, because if you take too narrow a path, you would get to an answer too fast, and you will miss out on reality and torture, as Munger says, torture the world into your model or your way of thinking. But it's probably also true that if I can narrow myself and have a lot of time, consistency in it, like for example I'm trying to do now, then I can probably get so many ideas as possible synthesized in a way that makes it be able to come up with something new. But of course I have to be aware if I diverge too much, because there probably is a balance to what is right, and I'm probably somewhat too much on the side of taking too much, although I do not want to suppress that part. It is really a strength, and I think it's good. But okay, so the next thing, I could go on about lots of academic models, and I like all the biases. Can go through all 25 fast, like what's it called? The first one, incentive, reward and punishment, super response. 1, that's 1. 2, liking, loving. 3, disliking, hating. 4, doubt avoidance tendency. 5, inconsistency avoidance tendency. 6, curiosity tendency. 7, envy and jealousy tendency. 8, 7 was Kantian fairness. 8, envy, jealousy tendency. 9, reciprocity tendency. 10, influence from mere association. I know you don't get much out of it, but I just think it's a good thing. 11, simple pain avoiding psychological denial. No, 11 is no, I think it's simple pain avoiding psychological denial. 12, excessive self-regard. I've been talking about that. 13, over-optimist tendency. 14, deprival super-reaction. 15, so to improve. 16, contrast misreaction, or contrast overreaction, something like that. 17, excessive stress response, or something like that. 18, availability misweighting tendency. 19, use it or lose it tendency. 20, chemical dependency. 21, senescence. 22, authority misweighting of over-influence. 23, twaddle tendency. 24, reason respecting tendency. 25, Lollapalooza effects, were from confluences of many of these biases. And I just wanted to go through them in my head somewhat, so I have them somewhat more on top of mind. But it's really, and I thought about that earlier today, that these biases are really not that much about what you should do, but more about what you should avoid. And actually that is exactly what Charlotte Munger talks about as being the paramount thing you should do. Like, for example, if you want to know how could I help in India, the best way to think about it is how can I hurt India, and then you avoid it. That's the best thing. I guess that comes from his more should I call it, his more conservative approach in relation to, and conservative to the degree that conservative approaches, at least to me, it does so when it's the part that resonates with me is the more agnostic part, because usually we overestimate how much insight we have. I think it's much more, in that sense, conservatives have much more humility in accepting things we don't know. It does not mean that I prefer conservative over or right wing before left wing or vice versa. I am quite agnostic to that, even that, but in general that's sound to be sort of keeping your humility, even though you should push through and try to make things better and try to come up with things so that you can know things, but it's still more safe to be like, and that's why it makes sense the way you think what you shouldn't do. And so what Charlotte Munger says in one of his speeches is the best way to know what to do in life is to talk about what should you avoid, and I think that's fairly true and great. But even though I have to admit that it's very unsatisfying to think about this in Sutra, because you still don't know exactly what you should know or what you should do, and so it really feels limiting to think that okay, I know about all the biases. I was asking the question. Actually, I should exercise this now. I've been thinking that I should, and this is in relation to inconsistency avoidance bias, meaning that you just continue doing the same thing over and over again, which I have been doing when I've said that the question I want to answer is, what should I do now? Instead, what's rational to do now? Instead, by perhaps I should say, what shouldn't I do now, right now? And the answer to that is probably to just quit this video because it's challenging or something. I don't. It's not necessarily it's challenging, but I should stop not trying to do anything. I should just go through my life drinking alcohol and not doing anything fruitful. I should be irresponsible at jobs and in education and not take my life seriously and so forth. But yeah, you see that it's usually when I do this exercise it becomes quite obvious, and I don't know where it really leads me. But I guess it's still, he says that's basically how the brain works. It works better with inversion, saying what you shouldn't do, and perhaps in some sense that's, and it's the same thing as the, what's the call in English? Excluding principle. That's a rough translation from Swedish, but basically if you have 5 alternatives, you can figure out what's the right one by excluding the others. 4, for example, if you think that 4 of them are very bad, and that's probably a good way to go. But it's still not sure how that relates to me, or how I should understand that, because it's not a very satisfying answer still. But if I try to not go down too many rabbit holes and just focus on what should I do now, and the academic models in relation to my life and so forth, what I'm doing now is I'm an ape walking back and forth, and I could think about myself as chemical processes that ends up being me doing this. And more interestingly, I'm a primate, an ape, in a society that relates to other people, and we want to create value for each other, right? That's what. That's a important and good thing to do, right? And that's is built in the economics of our economic system, that you don't get a salary if you don't help people, and that correspondence and back and forth, providing value for someone else is that's how the economy works. That's why the capitalistic system sort of works quite well. It has its limits, and I don't say it can't be replaced, but it still has some virtues, and those, depending on how you value those virtues compared to what you perceive as being possible alternatives, that determines your ideology in politics and so forth. But I just focus on the values that are existing, and that is that you won't get money if you don't perform something. Every company consists of giving a product, and they would never get rich if people would not willingly give their money for that product. And if we're rational, that would be a terrific society. But that's the biggest discussion, really. How rational are our decisions, and that's up to debate. I don't think we're very rational, but I also think I'm not sure to say good enough, but I still have to make up my mind about that, as these are complex issues, and I want to be humble enough to understand that I don't understand it completely. But so we can bring up that, and that's probably one limiting thing in all this, and that is that all value that is produced is not necessarily captured in the economy. Like, for example, I'm convinced that what I'm doing right now is very valuable, but I don't get paid for it. I don't get anything for it. And that's what you do with education. So the leap there from education to implementation and creating value, and I have to understand that, or at least this is my father talking, but he would usually say that you have to understand that you're in the transition phase into the adult life, and that's true. Although I tend to think also that I shouldn't use that as an excuse, even though I don't think he does that, but I'm just telling myself that I should not take that as an excuse for not addressing that question. What should I do with my life? What should I do right now or in the near future? And so part of the answer, I guess, to what should I do now, part of the answer is just keep going. I mean, that's what you should do. That's the only thing you should do. Go fail again, as shouldn't bring up too much TV series, but I watched Game of Thrones one, and I do this, even though I'm aware that I am biased from the first bias, incentive and reward and punishment, to rationalize to watch, for example, series. I am aware of that, but I also think it's to do something that's pleasurable every day, that enables you to be good. It's possible that I'm just rationalizing in a way that's not true, but I do think, and that's why I boiled down. I stopped watching 2, and I thought about watching 2 every day, and started to watch 1, even though I aim to do every other day, but we'll see where it goes. Anyway, I shouldn't spoil, but yeah, well, Jon Snow said he failed. I really failed. And then the other guy says to him, well, go fail again. And that's sort of it's really about that you just Peter Thiel mentioned that he doesn't think that a failed business is something good. It is a tragedy. You shouldn't think that, oh, I'm just learning, and it is a tragedy. And so you shouldn't just get used to failing in that sense, because you don't want to do it. You don't want excuses for it. You don't want to avoid it. You want to be afraid of failure for sure. That's healthy. But and I think he's right in that sense. So I'm just think that the general attitude that was portrayed here to Jon Snow is that even if it's not working out well, or if you think it's not working, keep going. That's the only thing you can do. And in relation to that, when I'm on the next rabbit hole of sort of wisdom that I picked up, I read from James Boswell is a famous autobiographer, or not autobiographer, but a biographer of Samuel Johnson. Samuel Johnson was the guy in the 18th century, late 18th century, I think, in England, who was the first person to make a comprehensible dictionary of all. I'm not sure if it was a dictionary or a encyclopedia or a just word book. I think it was something like that. Anyway, of the English language, and so he's a famous person that Scholmenger admired, and James Boswell wrote a biography of him, a really thick one, that basically established the biography genre. And here it is. That's Samuel Johnson, and that's James Boswell have written it, and it's quite thick, as you see, and it's actually as much as 1,001 pages. I have read it, the whole of it. No, I'm just kidding. I haven't. I definitely don't have read the whole book, but I have. Sorry, I'm just trying to make things look reasonably acceptable here. I read a passage in it, and I really remembered it because it was illuminating in some sense. And I don't know if it was Samuel Johnson who tells someone else or something like that, but he advised a friend who had taken on a lot of debt, and he sort of told him to, with the same spirit that you once accepted and consented and wrote on to those those loans. With that same spirit, you should now address the question of paying them back. And that was his general. I really felt that was empowering, because it was really confront your obstacles, confront your mistakes, and the situation you faced yourself, that you put yourself in, and just face your problems. And I think that rash, blunt attitude is quite something that I think I have to develop more of, and don't be too much in, I don't want to say contemplative state, because that's probably useful, but not as much in a gloomy or not worrisome, but anguished. No, that's too hard, but there's something that is more on the worrying side rather than the face your problem side, sort of. So I think that, and it's an attitude really. So that's probably why I remember it, because it was so that's something I had to develop a very good constructive attitude. And that's, yeah, going back to the overarching question here. I know that I'm diverging all the time, but I just feel it's good to to go down some rabbit hole, because they obviously illuminates my existence, I think. But so, and I ended up here contemplating the thing that you should just keep on going, that derived from what should you not do, well, you should exclude that and just keep going, and that's the approach. And realize that you are, this is a relation to bias number 5, that inconsistency and avoidance tendency, that yeah, sure, most of the things that you're doing, well, all of the things that you're doing can be better. Everything you can do can be better, but it can also be a lot worse. And where on the scale you are on that, and in what areas you are where on that scale, it doesn't really matter in the sense that the direction where you should go, because you should go up. It's the only thing, right? It doesn't matter how good or bad you are in that way, even though it's for sure very good, and that's thing that Schollemunger harping about, and I think it's really, really profound and great, that you should try to get an objective, rational view of yourself and how good you are in different skills, and because that's necessary for knowing your strength. According to Peter Drucker, we usually don't know what our strengths are, so it's really hard to know, and it's really good to try to know with feedback and so forth. But so you don't really know how good you are in all those things, but you do know that you're basically doing the things over and over and over and over again. We all do. We all come back to the same thoughts and speak the same way. We just continue. No one is having exact the same behaviors deep rooted in our brains as someone else. We always have our unique thing, unique way to do things, and that in itself is that's a consequence of, well, Munger says it's potentially because of saving cognitive space in our brains, and something evolution did and so forth, and that's obviously true, but you have to learn and unlearn things, and the hard thing is to unlearn, and so that's the striving to the betterment, to be better. But in the end of the day, all you have to go with for now is your ongoing habits, what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, and exclude even more things that are not good to do, perhaps. And that's not very easy to know all the time, but so this is a practice that I have, which I think is good, but who knows? I can't know for sure. And it's probably there are things that are better to do than this, but there are also things, again, that is much worse, and I should have faith in some sense that what I'm doing is good. And even though I'm in bias and doing so, I must still be conservative enough, or have humility enough to say that, well, I don't know perfectly well what I should do better exactly, and that I should, as long as I'm alive and things are going well, I don't act until I know for sure that something is good, actually. Even though it can be intimidating, or you could limit yourself if you're done plunging through things, I think you should do that. And I probably should develop that skill more, but as long as it's to a large degree risk-free. But something that I thought about there that was really important that I forgot. It was in relation to this with risk to just continuing. I just dropped everything there. I'm sorry, but yeah, it was in relation to this, that you keep on doing the same thing again and again and again, because that's inconsistency avoided, that's learning basically, and you're sure you have to unlearn things, but you're still on that ongoing path, and you don't know exactly what you should change, but you try to value things and try to exclude even more that is bad and include more that is really good. And in that process, I forgot where I came from when thinking about this, but I guess we came from inversion and what should I focus on and what should I do, and feeling calm in that you're doing what you can to eliminate bad habits and building new ones as long as you can, but you should still be, yes, that was the thing, conservative enough and have humility enough to say that you don't know exactly what's the right thing, but and that's why you're just relying on your behaviors and doing things over and over and over again. As Will Durant said in history, that if we didn't have traditions, we don't have anywhere to go with our brains to know what to do and feel valuable, and we can be how skeptical as possible and don't get anywhere. And that's probably a similar way of the, and it's basically like the inductive argument for relying on science and relying on. And David, you mentioned that we can't know exactly for sure that, like, induction is still a problem, and induction meaning can't go through. Either you know what it is or you can look it up, but if you rely on what has seemed to work previously, you continue doing that, and to the degree that it has worked, you can continue to do that, but you don't really know exactly what the next thing to do in relation to that sort of induction process, but you can experiment and do new things as long as they are not very unsafe. And that's perhaps that. By the way, that's what Peter Drucker recommends us to do. That to just experiment a lot, or at least for tests. It's actually a practice from the Jesuits, I think, original, or Presbyterian Church, I don't know, or Kaplan, or something, that should just write exactly what you think will happen in the near future if you're doing something, and then you do it, and then after 9 months you see what happened and see if you was right or wrong, and that's a feedback process, of course, and that's relating to this induction thing, and that's, by the way, how you find out your strengths, he says, Peter Drucker. And so that's, I realize, connected to that, to just evaluate things based on, but so that's quite interesting, that everything I do is an ongoing process. This is a realm of thought that I've never been in, really, and at least these connections, that everything I do in life is just repeating all the behaviors that I have, trying to upgrade some of them, but in general, in the broader sense, I'm just doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, and that's part of a bias, and that's the reason to why I have to unlearn a lot of that. And as he mentioned, Schlumberger, at a point that you really have to adapt, and that's one of his main claims from Tai Lopez that I remember is you have to be. It's not the strongest who survives, or strongest or who survives. It's the most adaptable, and I think that accounts for humans as well, even though it's not on a biological evolutionary scale. It's just for your life, how you upgrade your brain, because genes can't upgrade in that same sense as the brain can, but the brain really have that ability, and we have to test new things and upgrade ways of doing things in the brain. And the key to that is, of course, in order to motivate it, one key to that is getting in control of your feelings, because feelings have an immense influence on behavior. Of course, it's immensely influential. Perhaps the governing thing, who knows? And so, but yeah. And one thing I thought about in relation to just do things over and over again, and sort of what you should not do. If you exclude a lot of things, what's left? And something that come back to me again and again and again is one thing Charlotte Munger said, or I read. I think it was in an article published quite recently, last year or two, where in an interview with him, where he said, there is no real substitute for. It's not a real substitute to read and think. Read and think, that's really what you have to do. And that is probably when you hear that, you realize you really have to be in this for the long haul. You really have to be persistent about it, but you should not fool yourself to think that you can not address important areas of your life decisively just because of that. It might be the right thing to do still, to just tackle that. But so you should not be too comfortable in just sitting there and reading and thinking all the time. Like one part of thinking is, for example, coming up with the conclusion, I have to do something, and then you do it. You shouldn't use it as an excuse, but for not doing important things. But yeah. So yeah. I'm feeling, in some sense, it feels as if I just started with this video. I could be going on for hours, but in another sense, I feel as if, well, I think I want to continue. But anyway, but there is still this pressing issue of where should one go with your thoughts, and this is an illuminating insight for sure. And it comes from talking with you guys, but I'm really talking to myself right now in my perspective. But what I've been thinking about is that is this question of okay, so there are some changes I would like to do in my life in a really short term, in some sense, and one of those is to I've been talking about that previously, but to focus on a topic for prolonged periods of time. That's one thing I've been mentioning, but also just finding time to do that. And reading usually robs me from time to think, which is a paradox, but and usually I want to get deep into a subject, but I feel intimidated by the scope of the subject, and yeah, it's really struggling to know how broad you should go when you learn something, and how focused. And I don't have that much continuity in having lots of hours focus on a particular problem and not after day, but I think that's what I need to do for myself. And so one thing that comes up to mind is The One Thing, that book that I've been talking about. And in relation to that, I perhaps should, but it's hard to know because I still want to do these type of videos. I want to read, but although at the same time I could possibly also say that the main thing I have to do is get a job, and that's paramount, so that focusing on that, although that's not as intellectually, it's not as intriguing and interesting, and I usually view it as something that will just happen. Okay, if I just continue doing what I'm doing, I have something in progress that is going forward. But if I just, another perspective of that would be to, or the One Thing perspective of that, if I only could do one, then I would do the one thing. The one thing would be search a job and don't focus on whatever that other thing might be. That is my one thing, like for example reading history, or learn, for example, 10 ideas from every academic discipline, or trying to synthesize those. But so and I don't really know how to think about that, and what I do think, I'm just trying to figure out how I should fit that into my day and everything I'm doing. It's just remarkable how fast the day just rushes by, and it just disappears in some sense. But and I realized that, I don't know what time is it. It's 6 p.m. Exactly. Because I really, really do think that continuous thought about something will make me much better off in the long run. I really can get a lot out of that. And I have to sort of, but yeah, at the same time it's obviously also true that learning, well, the thing I'm thinking about here is that, well, of course, if I would take, for example, searching for a job, that would be my permanent thing. Then I would have done that, and then afterwards I would think, okay, next thing then, if I only could choose focus X amount of hours per day on like say history or just learning basic principles in or ideas in academic disciplines, if I only can choose that or being more going on social interaction events and so forth, even though that's not applicable now in corona times, I can't do that because it's not responsible to meet people, too many people, but I could go on events or webinars and so forth, but anyway, in my main point is that of course I can't choose one or the either, one thing only to focus on. It's obvious that I can't do that. I can't just, but so I have to do both, and that's of course same with everything. I still have to eat, and I still have to buy lots of things that I have to do, but I'm trying to understand yeah, I don't really know how incorporate learning into other things that I want to do in that sense. But one thing, obviously it feels like, okay, if you have 4 hours of deep focus like on a day, which is recommended in the one thing, and then the rest of the day you have more conventional things and so forth. If you have those 4 hours, then just do 2 hours for more social outgoing things, or like focus on getting those events in your almanac basically, because when you do go to your events, that's later down the day usually, or so forth. And then you have the other 2 hours for example, learning the academic models or something like that. But if I would do that, it feels reasonable, but it's not at all what is said in the one thing. It says that you should only exclude. You should do, according to them, it would really be 4 hours a day only on getting to know people and so forth. And so I don't really know. Perhaps it's helping you to focus. And that's the basic thing. That if you focus but here's a principle that sort of rivals the one thing, and that principle is marginal utility. If the utility of an activity every day, but obviously that's obvious that that's the case, that some activities like eating and so forth is something you all have, and sleeping, you can't just do one thing in your whole life. But so I guess it's just but it's perhaps if one thought is that if you really go full 4 hours only trying to find social events and so forth, you would be really, really fucking great at and good at that. And that's perhaps the main thing here. Although I just realized that this is interesting. I never realized this, that one thing one day is not necessarily the same thing as another day. Like, for example, if maybe that's the key thing here, like prolonged focus on one thing that I've been talking about, that because it has this, as I've talked about, that what should be your daily goal, so you're online on being with your weekly goal, and so that you're in faith with being on your monthly goal, and you're 1 year goal and your 2 year goal and your 5 year goal and your overall vision for life. So boil it down today, what should you do? And then the answer is perhaps, well, today and just right now I had to do this thing, but later on it could be another thing. And so the next day it could be another thing, basically. Perhaps, I'm not sure, but like for example, if you're, but at the same time I'm not sure, because if I have decided that the most important thing in the perspective of this month is to get to know perhaps 2 more people, then I have to plan lots of events and optimize for that enough. And if I optimize for that, then I won't optimize for example, reading and learning that much. So it's really boiling down, and it's excluding lots of things, like for example, learning about academic ideas, and of course you have to do lots of things in order to be successful. You need to read and yeah, maybe I'm just harping about something here, but anyway, 2 hours on one issue and 2 on the other, and so, from time to time I could do 4 hours on one day on one issue and then 4 hours on another, and so forth. If I have, it violates the foundational thinking about the one thing, but it's still, I still think it's a good way to go. Perhaps I should reread it sometime and come up with another idea, but I still think this is relevant for my situation right now, and what I usually think about in relation to just life, and that that it feels as if I don't have prolonged focus on issues, even though I have sometimes. But and now it's really in the like for example, I do some things during the day, earlier during the day, that ends up being like, it is sort of prolonged focus, but it's not perhaps prolonged focus on the really deep issues that I think I should be focused on. And why am I actually worried about this? Perhaps because I feel that I'm not doing it, but now I don't know I have to do it, and I'm actually trying to get time to do it, and that's a really good thing. Like what I'm doing right now is extremely valuable, probably, and I should get back, not stuck in this rabbit hole. But okay, we go on day by day by day doing the same thing, because we're just creatures that learn things, and we have to unlearn a lot of things in order to be better. But we still do what we do, and that's a good thing, sort of. Or yeah, what am I even saying? I'm confused. but yeah. But I have to take more into consideration here. I've just been harping about, okay, the economy, chemistry, biology, economics, law, government. That's an important aspect, that everything that we're around, we're countries that have stood for something, and it's founded on mutual agreement to some degree, and that we use to live our lives and feel part of something. We know that we're part of, like in my case in Sweden, I live around Swedish people and people who visit our country and people who immigrate here to us, but it's still a country with, and that gives some type of satisfaction knowing that you're part of something, I guess. But it's really about law, and it has always governed societies for as long as they have been on this planet, civilizations. And it is crucially important that they exist. We all always want some authority, sort of. We need that. Anarchy is, well, I can rule it out. I'm not a professional on that, but it haven't really worked. And where I know complete anarchy in civilizational times. So we have that dynamic, and it's interesting to think about what does that really mean. Well, what we need to feel safe and have trust in that, and things have to work in order for us to be rely on these constitutions and institutions. I mean, and we have law to determine if someone is misbehaving and if everything is as it should be, but it's still a large amount of freedom, and you take a job and you do all those kind of things, and in that you're still just an ape dealing with lots of apes, but you have a supercomputer on top, as Elon Musk puts it, and an ape with a supercomputer on top, yeah. So yeah, you have all the emotions to deal with, and those causes sort of strange motivations and all that. And probably quite reasonable to think that those people who really care about every human being and all that is are probably quite wise to do so, because that means that although it's perhaps not always an advantage for your all your genes, it's still like if 10 people get to produce more if I do things right, then I have a lot of genes in them. Like, I share a lot of genes with every human being, and just 2 people reproducing more, like for example increasing the reproduction, if 2 people, no, even this should be the case, that if one human being that is not me reproduces 50% more, or let's say 100% more, like 2 times more than they're doing, that is better for me than me increasing my only 50%, probably, because almost every gene is. So I should really be, from an evolutionary perspective, I should be concerned not only on my, but everyone's reproductions in some sense. But anyway, so it's reasonable to care for humanity, really. I don't mean this as a more ethical thing. I just, from an evolutionary perspective, it's quite reasonable to, I think. But anyway, that's not that interesting, perhaps. Although it is, I don't know. But so here I am, here I stand, trying to deal with my existence. I've been harping about inconsistency, about my existence, about friends. No, I haven't talked about friends and family, but that's of course a component in this. We're social creatures. We have families, and most of us have families, and we're friends, hopefully, and we have perhaps partners and children and co-workers, employers, employees, statesmen that we looked up to, that we despise, or preferably dislike, and don't get too emotional about that, but people we don't like and that we like and love. Nothing wrong with being too much in love, or well, that could be potentially quite bad, but it's not in itself something bad to love. It's hard. That's what makes it great. Now, Okay. From all the human beings, I should just start to get a bit cold again. Where were I? It feels as if I'm somewhat stuck, but I want to persist for a little longer. If I'm a human being with lots of people around me, and I want to do something about my life, yeah, that was probably what I was aiming at, that I don't really know what to do with my life and what to get prolonged sort of learning and so forth. But I realized this is what I'm doing right now. But if this is what I'm doing right now, why then am I sort of unsatisfied with what I'm doing? And perhaps the reason is that I don't feel as if I am connecting knowledge on a sufficient level, in some sense. It's as if I feel I'm not progressing in my thinking. Well, then the question is, what would make me feel as if I am progressing? Well, one just crazy idea that pops up into mind is to know a little bit about basically every single famous person that there is. But that's not, that's just one thing. Oh, yeah, famous people, a person that exists, reasonable amount of people who exists in history, perhaps. I don't know, depending on this century, but 10 people from every century, perhaps. No, including kings and so forth, it's probably about much more than that, but that's so shallow. There has to be something more. And this is the thing about inert knowledge that Whitehead talks about. But it also relates to emotions, and because if you feel some emotions, you're usually more productive in some sense. You get some stamina and some spark, and emotions are somewhat hard to control in that sense. But I do believe that you train yourself, your brain, to be in some states, and I think also the Stoics are some way into that, although they're more like any situation should be your home, should be what you're comfortable with. It's nothing that can happen that you're not have tranquility of mind when confronted with. And I like that idea, and I think that's similar to Charlie Munger's idea. But yeah. But that there are still external things that influence how you feel, and you of course have to take that into consideration when being among families and friends and so forth. That obviously influences you, and exercising influences you, and so on and so forth. But how then to relate to the fact that I can't come up with any ideas right now, and I feel as if this is the time that I should do. I guess I had to go deeper, think again, persist on this problem. And perhaps be more contemplative really about what does it all mean, what my situation here, what I'm sitting. It's quite mysterious to make sense of it. It's quite interesting to just think about that it is something to make sense of, that is not obvious. Of course it's not obvious how to think about your situation. I'm here, and I'm evolutionary adapted and evolved, and that's something I know because of my brain and all the history that have ended up making us having huge insight into lots of things. And the brightest minds have really come up with these ideas, and I should not think that I am as bright as all those people, even though I could have some qualities that rivals them perhaps in some areas. Like Goethe, I think I'm sort of in that sort of Goethe realm, even though I don't know basically nothing about Goethe. I just have a positive association to it, and I like his writings. Like, for example, he's saying, I've forgotten, but it's something like, I forgot the beginning, but it's something like, if there's something you could do, then begin it. Agency has wisdom, power, and magic in it. It's something like that. Action has magic in it, or something. But if you something you can do or think you can, then do it. Agency has magic and power in it, or action has power in it. And yeah, why did I come up with that? And this is quite interesting. I think I've been mentioning this before, but when you're contemplating things deeply, you're and confronted with something that's challenging, that's really when you're exposed to something new that helps you develop. So that's interesting. I should not forget that. That's very interesting. But if you then persist, that's when the breakthrough happens. I actually think that's the case, because you're uncomfortable in facing that situation. I don't remember how I got to Goethe, but I remember that before I thought about that, I thought that something is, you can be confronted in awe to things, and that things really are mysterious, that you're an ape, sort of, and you're sitting here and understanding things. And I'm an ape understanding things because I have a brain, have a history of people who are very bright. Yes, and that's how I got there. How good they are, and it's hard to know how good I am, but I perhaps could have some qualities. And those qualities, I'm not sure about, but going back to history, and I'm sitting here having friends, contemplating, having some family members in the middle period of getting into the adult life, like the Marcus Aurelian approach, knowing that that's something that tons of millions of billions of people have confronted before me. Know what to do with life. Most people, according to Seneca at least, just lets life happen to them, and they roll around on useless activities, never getting time for their own to contemplate things and addressing their lives in depth. It's similar to the Nietzschean way, sort of understanding life and where you should go. And it is natural to don't know. It doesn't necessarily mean that inaction and not finishing an education or trying a certain job or striving for something is bad or wrong, or it doesn't mean that it could potentially be a case that you should do it, but it's a risk that you sacrifice time from contemplating where you want to go in life. But it's also true, and here's the thing here, I usually go quite fast into all these diversion, but I want to be a little more calm when I take new, so it doesn't get these extreme diversions. I have to be more sort of connected in my thinking here. But the economic thing is of course a crucial and important part in this. Meaning specialization, and you have to get into the economy. And that's the thing I have in front of me. But it's also true that that exactly is the main thing here, is that I had to get in contact with people who are very sharp and interesting to talk with. And I don't necessarily will find that in my first job, perhaps. It's unclear, but hopefully I can manage that. I'll contact with. I'll probably have to find people in other ways. That's a social thing that I've been talking about earlier. But yes, so the social thing. But it's still mysteriously interesting to think that I am just an ape sitting here trying to understand things. And I know a lot of stuff, but I still don't understand things. And I'm probably also somewhat wrong, perhaps, in thinking that any academic discipline is applicable to my life right now. Like, for example, physics. Is it applicable to me right now? Well, yeah, forces work, and you have to rely on them and understand them. You can't and calculate things in order to achieve constructive things that are valuable for society. One thing that I could address that I haven't talked about at all is my vision, sort of what I think is good for society, which I had to challenge and update if I'm wrong. But I've been thinking that visions is lacking in society, and we need more entrepreneurs and just scientists who sort of a cultural shift that goes back more to what can we achieve. I want to dedicate my life to curing cancer, or extending life, or fight poverty, or go to Mars, or whatever. Something that's bold and outside of what usually is thought of as conventional career and good life choices and so forth. So that's something I've been thinking quite a lot about. And I could be wrong, and there is a sensation in me that says, well, Charlemagne would say just stick with an old career. Career. Yeah, and there is something in me that says, well, remember that it is, some people view that as not very good and not creative and not stimulating enough. Although I also have to admit that some people, those who really succeed, or those that I've looked up to, like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and perhaps Tai Lopez to some extent, those people are extremely sharp. They have probably an IQ of, they all fit into Mensa, minimum 150 IQ for sure. And I don't know what my IQ is, and I don't know how good it is for me to contemplate that type of career choice. And even if but at the same time, it's also true that you should do something that, as Munger said, that you have an interest in. I forced myself to learn a lot of things, he says, but I couldn't be particularly good at anything that I wasn't really interested in. And I think he's right about that. And he said, if all feasible, you should do something that you're really interested in. And well, Tai Lopez says that you could basically make money in anything. And yes, in some sense, I guess that's true if you get the skills necessary, the sort of surrounding skills necessary that is necessary to support that. And now when I've been thinking about it a lot, I think that I actually would do best as an intellectual, thinking about issues, writing books, speaking to people. Professor, perhaps, but in another era, perhaps. There's a cultural shift that actually something that I contemplated when I read Einstein just today, actually, final pages, that he said that there was a cultural shift, or he said when he started out in the late 19th century, he didn't mention it. What he said was that he wouldn't be if he was young today. This is in the 50s. In 1950, he says, if I would be young today, I would probably not get into science because it's so politically influenced, or so politically, you don't have that independence of thoughts and academic freedom in some sense. And that he would probably be a plumber or some merchant or something instead. And that's quite interesting that he said so when Charlie Munger actually became one. That's very interesting. Perhaps he read him. He was probably 25 when he entered. Well, Charlie Munger was born 24, so yeah, he was in his middle 20s or late 20s when Einstein claimed that, probably. But Charlie Munger mainly says that why he didn't choose in Caltech chose to be an engineer or go into physics or whatever. It was that he had a friend who was much better than him, and he understood that he could, if he would go into that, he would just be an also-ran. And that's perhaps similar to what I am thinking about in this. I don't know where my IQ, if it's 120 or 170. I don't actually know. I did an IQ test that just said, well, this measures up to, I don't remember if it was 115 or 130 or 120, but it just said, we can't know if you're better than this, or you're better than this, but we would have to get a test, not on a computer, in order to know for sure. And I think that was Mensa's test. But I don't know at all. Only thing I know is that it's above 115. perhaps 100 better, and 100, I think it was perhaps 125 or 128 above that, so minimum. And the test, so if you have anything above that, it just says we don't know, it's above X, and I forgot what X was. But so that makes, where were I? By the way, that rallying about the IQ thing is basically just something that was socially triggered by my ape mind to just think that I wanted to explain well what, but it's actually very irrelevant, I think, to this conversation here. I just, but anyway, Einstein, political, and he said, yeah, no scientist, I don't know if he was joking, but the last breakthrough was perhaps just the DNA thing in the, I think it was 50s, 40s, I don't know. Of course, there have been a lot of breakthroughs after that, but they figured out about chromosomes and heritability and so forth. And after Einstein, and yes, some in the quantum physics, but in quantum mechanics, but it's still, they don't know that much. It's still a sort of a puzzle, and no right extreme breakthrough. And string theory, at least accomplished with Peter Thiel's friend Eric Weinstein, it's just not something. And but it's interesting. Eric Weinstein said himself he didn't score very well on processing and sort of IQ test. He said it's just processing, and that's promising if I would really want to do something. So IQ is probably not. But he's on the left, and he's more sympathetic to the idea of multiple intelligences, or that it's not only sort of IQ and so forth. And even though I am sympathetic to that it is probably not that hard, what do you say, hard and cut, I'm still skeptical to well, I don't know, it's probably still a lot to it. So well, I actually don't know what I think, but still, I was talking about this cultural shift in science, and both Peter Thiel and Eric Weinstein really think there's a cultural shift, and that's away from like big university and big science. It's really just a myth. It robs us of the agency of people just trying to do new things and independence, and exactly what Einstein had. And he even was wearing the patent office where he did his breakthroughs. So you could argue if that we can't know for sure that that's the reason, but he was in his, I think is in his 20s, I don't know, but it took a while until he came there. Yeah, that was in Switzerland, so it was probably, I don't remember if it was before or after his university education. I actually think it was afterwards, and he got a job there because he didn't get a job as a professor, so he was just sitting there and contemplating things. And perhaps that thing, being in an environment that is business oriented, I don't know for sure, but it can be a good thing. But in general, just that thing to not be stuck in the academic environment is probably a good thing. But well, if the environment was different at that time at universities, it would have sufficed with just being a normal researcher. Why is this? Sorry, it's not the focusing thing on a mobile. Anyway, so it's interesting to think about what was the things that made is there really a cultural shift? And if there is a cultural shift in science, then it's perhaps good to be outside it, because the shift, at least according to Einstein in this book, he seemed to imply that it was much more political pressure and so forth, and Peter Thiel and Erik Weiss seem to think it's gone haywire and it's really bad. I'm sympathetic to that, but I also know that I probably quit it because it was challenging in the education in some sense socially, not in with students, but with the all that's of course, but with the some management course, or it was not the decisive moment for me when I tried to. There was quite strong pressure to do a presentation that was not really this is a co-working thing, and we were not really clear about what we were going to present, and it was sort of fuzzy, and in the middle of that I had to take a decision, and of course it's an influence, sort of pain bias influence, that just of course you want to quit if you can avoid that situation. That was challenging, but the overarching thing, and it's even when I got there, after a while I realized I was not as impressed as I thought I would have been, and that's perhaps accounting for something. But I shouldn't, as Will Durant said, you shouldn't, no one can get so much of our heritage, civilization heritage, in our brains in order to safely judge our institutions and traditions and so forth. Although we have to make an attempt, I guess. And yeah. But so okay, where were we? Again. Going back, this calm thing again, not going into much, digressing too much, and I brought up Einstein and culture shifts for a reason. I don't remember the exact reason. I was onto something interesting here about awe of nature and where it can lead us. That my situation is somewhat, I'm in this economy and I'm really an ape, and I'm trying to figure things out, and I had to relate to the thing that I have family and friends and want to get a place in this, and I have to know my strengths in order to know that for sure what's good in relation to that, and I have to know I have to take steps towards being a part of things, and I probably in my first job will not be connection to that, but I still need to meet people who are competent in diverse areas, and that was perhaps where I diverged, because it's not obvious that all the most intelligent people are at the universities, although I think many of them are, but as Alexander Bard said, that the most intelligent people, I don't think he said intelligent, but he said the most smart people or something are actually leaving the universities, and no one is choosing an academic career today, at least not if they're serious. And I don't know how much there is into that, if he's influenced by Peter Thiel a lot, because he also admires, as I do, Peter Thiel. But I'm still confronted with, I'm sitting here, don't have a job, don't have a clear career path, don't have a clear, but in some sense, not fitting in really 100% is in some sense the good. Perhaps I do think difference makes for individual creativity and novelty, of course. But the question is, as for genes and anything, and for left-wing reformation of politics, is the alternative better? Most mutations doesn't make that much difference. Some of them make damage, and just a few make positive. Same thing probably with policies, and same thing with perhaps doing new things. We were talking about habits and inconsistency, avoidance, and tendency that protects us probably and arguably from just doing insane things. I could, if I had nothing of it, I could just jump and crash my head on the jump upside down and crash my head and break my neck if I didn't have any sort of limits to what I do. So it's a good consistency in some sense, good consistency. But the diversity in some sense is good. Although I know Peter Thiel have written 2 books, and the first book was called The Diversity Myth. And I don't think it means the same thing. It probably means that entrepreneurship is really good and so forth, but and different entrepreneurship, but you shouldn't think that just lots of diversity in universities are automatically going to transform into novel ideas. It could contribute for sure, but that's like meritocracy is still like the permanent thing you have to use, and I think it's right about that in some sense, even though I don't want to go into this too much. I think, but because I do think that diversity is important in many ways, and I also think that different, like for example, genders and so forth can have other, like females could have other insights and abilities that men don't have in relation to scientific practice and so forth. And there are lots of discussions here. I don't want to go into that right now. I don't know even what his thesis is in the diversity myth actually, but in relation to, what one thing I do think about what he wants to protect us from, a fallacy that he wants to protect us from, is the fallacy to think that just because we indirect have a lot of ideas, we're doing what he calls indirect. He has sort of 3 true things. He has indirect or no, definite or indefinite, and he has optimistic or pessimistic. And the worst thing is to be in indefinite pessimism. The best thing is definite optimism. And definite optimism, the definite part is to think that, not passively, like for example they're doing in biology. He criticized that they passively sort of try to correlate things and just come up with things instead of thinking things, complex coordination, and think things through step by step, not just going the meta level, because if you go too much on the meta level, you abandon the critical evaluation and the factual insight into the situation and the parameters, and you don't want to abandon that. And I would probably argue that is why he thinks Einstein failed later in life, because he just passively took throw quite just through mathematical ideas and equations, and in order to see if they fitted into the universe, and had no new insight into like practical insight, like for example the non-simultaneity of events, which is impossible, and the equivalence between gravitational matter and inertial matter, which was already known, but the implication was that free fall was the same thing as being in space without the acceleration, or the acceleration thought of the thing. Is it really space-time changing? Anyway, so we had new insights, and the indefinite approach is just to taking too much a step back and not going into the details, and I think that's, if you think the indefinite approach is to say, in that sense, it probably is claiming when it comes to diversity to say that just if everything if I have diversity, the ideas would come automatically. But the answer he gives is, and this is a key point he gives in in any subject, really, not relating to diversity, just to what solves the problem, and it's always, you have to do it. Like you have to do the hard work. You have to do it. Like if you passively think that, well, what's the best thing to let's say, I don't know, but save the climate, for example. Well, do it yourself. Find a technology that solves the problem, and the indirect approach is often like, it's just avoiding the hard thing that needs to be done, and it's usually just confronting the problem head on, and that's what we avoid. That's what we avoid. So going back to my situation where I am now, because a side note, I think I'm doing an excellent job in this. I just have to say that I think that's really important for me to pat myself on my back, in accordance with what Charlie Munger says, it's really good. The best thing you can have is justified pride, because it gives you an incentive. Again, the first bias, reward, punishment, the strongest incentive bias we have. It gives you an incentive if you get proud of what you're doing good, and if you're and of course being honest with yourself when you're doing bad, because that gives you punishment, and that's a good thing if you're doing something bad. So I really think I'm doing some excellent job in having this long conversation where I really force myself to put together lots of dots and lots of knowledge, and exposing new territory that I've not been exposed to before, and force myself into it and not avoiding it, and understanding that process in itself is something constructive when I am going down that path of what is uncomfortable new realms of thought that I previously had thought was only challenging and a sign of failure, when it's actually developed myself and my thinking further. That was a long sentence. Yeah, so Einstein having lots of theories, thinking about Einstein having a lot of theories. My brain is tired, but this is where the interesting things happen, because still really a lot of things comes up into my mind when I think about it. Einstein sort of knew the definite. Being definite with problems is a good thing, and I have to do something. So okay, now we have that Einstein was very focused on just later in life on narrow things, but anyway he was or indefinite things. But the more interesting thing here was that he thought that the environment today was, or for actually 70 years ago, had been worse in academic settings, and that Peter Thiel think is even worse, and Eric Einstein too. And I'm growing up in that environment, and how should I relate to the fact that I have to meet people and get to know interesting people that it's interesting to talk with, while not perhaps being at a job that satisfies that. But it's probably still quite stimulating, I hope. Yeah, that's an interesting question, and there was something I want to remember the part about definite. But I was thinking about my abilities and potential, my paths forward. And by the way, something to boost my ego somewhat is that I'm an INFJ, and even though that's not scientific, it's Myers-Briggs, it's still the most rare personality types, and it's even rarer by men, so it's basically the most rare personality. The most, and even though it's not scientific, it's still objectively true that the most rare combination of answers I was to give those, and especially if you're a man. So yeah, I'm probably somewhat different. That's very strange to say, but I'm more open in these conversations now. And Goethe, by many people, were one of these. We also have McCarthy and Martin Luther King and Mother Teresa, and I don't necessarily think I relate too much to them. Like, I'm much more of a Confucian. This makes me sort of, because some aspect of me are quite associated to more altruistic left, and some parts of me are more strongly correlated to conservative right, and like Confucian, Epictetus, more related, Seneca more stoic sort of, and then they had the more altruistic or caring. But yeah, anyway, we don't have to go into that now, but and that's interesting. I think that's a strength of mine, that I can have more than one thought in my hand simultaneously, which is what the authors thinks that Einstein could do. I don't claim to be Einstein, but I think it's important for people to be able to have a lot of thoughts in the head simultaneously and contemplate them, and not just go to the conclusion because a friend told you that, or an authoritative person that you influence you a lot. But so I'm in the process of taking decisions about my situation in life, and where I want to go, and what's the consequence. Yeah. So we have Peter Thiel, definite thinking. We have Einstein, who thought that there's a difference in the academic setting right now, and also one thing is no suit fits all. As Peter Thiel said, it's not obvious what you should do, and like for example, and Samuel Johnson and Goethe and many authors, and Descartes and David Hume. Oh yeah, they had a connection to the universities, and that's probably an important thing usually, and they influence it. But in the internet era, it's even harder to know how necessary that is, and how that influences relations to how you get your influence in the people and insights and how you get forward in life in relation to the information in the internet era. And so yeah, getting around intelligent people again. And that's done by going to events, and that's, yeah, I've mentioned that before, where I think I lost some very fruitful ideas somewhere. I know I remember indefinite thinking. I remember like Einstein had a skeptical to universities, or at least at the time, and independence of thought, and yeah. But the governing thing here is basically what I think about myself and what is right for me. And that's not obvious at all at university, even though university is basically the most safe and good approach. But it feels like quite limiting for me going from Stockholm School of Economics, the most prestigious school in Sweden, having abandoned that, then to just, okay, and I can't go back because it's a limited amount of years, how long you can take for a bachelor, at least that's a claim. And going to Stockholm University or something else feels sort of, it's so primitive, so I don't know if it's worth time taking a bachelor there. So, but anyway, it's still this, how do you get around the right people, the interesting people that can help you forward and that you can help forward? That's really an issue that I have to go deeper down, and that's something I could dedicate these 2 or 4 hours a day to finding, and that's what I will do when the COVID pandemic is over. But I could start earlier, for sure. And perhaps I should write down the key ideas from this so I don't forget things. But at the same time, I don't want to take too much time to that when I'm in the middle of this video, but just put down the things really, really fast. Key things, at least those that I'm contemplating right now. Indefinite or definite. Sorry for this, but I'm soon back. Where were I? Yeah, indefinite, Einstein, different academic science, Theo Einstein, INFJ, my good path, a sort of author or communicator. That's something I could talk about. And yeah, 2 to 4 hours a day. The one thing focus, and prolonged focus. Yeah, there's some ideas, but so one thing that is that I focus 2 to 4 hours on, for example, what was it? Focus on where to find intelligent people, but that's, as I said, after Corona, or COVID pandemic, but anyway, it's really good to do. And yeah, and I actually feel like continuing for the moment, 2 hours here, but anyway. So if we have, and that's by the way one thing that I've found is very fruitful, talking. It makes me think. It makes me go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And I don't have to stop. But anyway, so going deeper. I am here, I sit here in a situation where I am indeed sort of very how should I say it? I am although yeah sorry, but I'm just thinking. So being in this situation where I am, where should I go? Where's the next step? What should I think about? I could meet new people. That's the thing, yes. But where is my situation? How should I describe myself here and where I am? I am an ape, a primate, sitting contemplating things. I am, as far as I know, constituted of quarks and atoms and molecules and DNA and whole sequences and organs and things that are developed through millions of years. I think. I don't know how long ago life began, or at least life on Earth began. But anyway, but it's a long time, and during that period, we've become primates and we've become humans, and we think, and then there's a lot of history and just behaviors and people thinking a lot, and it's to know how good you are in relation to peoples of history and even to people today, and what your thing is really in this world, what you're born to be and what you can contribute to. And yeah, I did sort of the Tai Lopez sort of 5 spheres where they intersected, and one thing there was being sort of a, not teacher necessarily, but modern world of teacher or maybe communicator. Even though I highly introverted in some sense, it's still toward that sort of talking with people, having conversation. I'm still quite much of a people person, even though I'm highly introverted in some senses. And that's one of these 5 spheres that he had. What do you want it to be when you were, I think it was 14 years old, and back that I was watching on Swedish Idol and dreamed sort of about being, actually going there myself and being a famous idol, like perhaps many other people did. But I think that's the strongest sort of urge. So I think I strive for being, but at the same time I think a lot of people do that. But if that's my best motivation, I probably should aim for it, I think, because I can perhaps have it in my genes to strive for it and feel that that's interesting and nice to do. I don't know, but I also think that I'm in general a person that people like, although I might have some traits and some behaviors that people don't like, but on broad basis people like me. even though that's hard to say, I actually do think that's true. It feels like bragging, but I think it's true. And I'm reasonably smart, so I can probably navigate that good enough to become someone. Like, for example, Jordan Peterson he confessed, I think, that he's not extremely good at math. Although that's, yeah, you can say that about. He was reasonably good, and I sort of think that I'm smarter than him in math, but I can't know for sure. It's really hard to know. But and math is not the only thing in being smart and intelligent, of course, but perhaps. But anyway, sorry. Yeah. So where were I? Where I should go in? Yeah, sort of the internet thing, if that's my thing, like being an author. Yeah, but that's perhaps a century late. Being an influencer, it feels like where everyone wants to be that, and it's like, is that really what you want to do? Sorry, I'm starting to get tired. Is it really what you want to do? Be an influencer? It feels somewhat striving to power, not in a good way, but perhaps it is a way. Perhaps that's my role. I've always been good at speeches in school, and I think that's something I shouldn't underestimate too much. But it feels weird to be striving to be an influencer. It feels not Hippocratic, but it feels nasty. In some way, you're searching for power, and that's nasty. But I think I don't know, I want to think of myself as some type of leader. But hey, that's, everyone wants that. But I don't also think of myself as someone who would accept not being a leader if I know someone else is better at leading. But if no one is, I think I want to take that role. And sometimes this sounds very bias number 12, excessive self-regard, but sometimes it feels that there is no good people leading our civilization today, or at least not in Sweden. Or there are some figures that I look up to for sure, but there are few of them, not many of them. We need more inspiring people to talk about interesting topics, and I think that's right thing to focus about. So I think my overall ambitions are good. It's just the path there that's unclear. But I still think that my underlying purpose is good. Like my underlying purpose that I formulated some years ago after I had a break from my studies. It was, my purpose is to motivate our civilization in order to accelerate our civilization's advancement in any area of human existence. And that's still something that I hold on to. My purpose is to motivate our civilization in order to accelerate our civilization's advancement in any area of human existence. To motivate. That was the thing that my friend said that was the thing that stood out. And because you were asked to do exactly that, call a friend and ask them what they thought and what stood out, and he said motivate. And I think that motivate part actually that's how I want to motivate people to become something greater. And I think there is not a Tony Robbins in me, but similar thing, but more intellectual. I don't know really, but again, it feels as if I'm some sort of, perhaps I should stop being so excusing myself for being cocky and admit that I think I can be something great. Although I don't. Now, yeah, in some sense, I should do that. I should know that I am competent in these areas and I probably have a lot of qualities. I should also know that I'm highly introverted, so there is a lot of things I could learn from still. And that there are still many things I have to learn in general that should make me cocky about anything, but I should also know that I am highly competent, I'm smart, I know a lot of things. I don't know how smart I am, I just know that I'm smart. And I also know there are a lot of smarter people in this world, and I also know that I have a perhaps quite unique combination of being smart and being someone who's interesting to listen to, but not because not all smart people are interesting to listen to. Although I don't know that for sure. I'm probably better off when I have a clue of what I want to say, when I can make a speech out of it and have practiced it for a time. But who knows, perhaps the only reason that I delivered good speeches was because I practiced them. And I don't know if that's true, but I think there's something in my way of contemplating things that resonates with people. I could be wrong about that, and I think that's related to both my mother and my father. Like my father has an interest of things relating to human beings that is quite unique for a man to have that along with his more sort of masculine side. And I also have a side from my mother that is very jolly in relation to relationship and human beings and intense, that my father to some degree shares. But again, you could say that I'm about a lot of people. So it's hard to know how you should evaluate that and understand yourself. But it scares me somewhat that Peter Drucker said that we don't know our strengths, and in the case of when we don't know, we think we don't know, we're usually wrong. But and the same with weaknesses, but earlier I thought I was quite bad at social things. And now I'm more sort of, I'm bad at some social things, but not all. And that's an interesting thing. Should we take a step back along with trying to be definite? We're talking about, again, from academic ideas and being a part of the economy, trying to get a living, and also simultaneously we're a biological creature from chemistry and physics, and I'm trying to navigate this world with human beings, apes just trying to navigate in the economy, trying to helping each other, and that's why we get money, and we have science, and we have lots of aspects where creating value don't necessarily translate into money, even though that's the end game and a good thing to strive for if you can capitalize on that and so forth, which I perhaps should try to do. And if I can become some sort of influencer, that's probably great, but is there something bad about that? Do I want to be famous? That's a harder question. And again, I was thinking about what I should do during the days and so forth, and that's interesting and fruitful, but perhaps I should just focus on what I am doing, and I want to be what I want to do and what I want to be. And that includes discussions and understanding our environment and where we are and where we want to go, and history and visions was lacking, and even though one central part had to be, of course, my purpose. My purpose is to motivate our civilization in order to accelerate our civilization that was within any area of human existence. But later on, I found this overarching sort of vision of the world, and that was more like we have to have more visions. We have to have more people that stand up and do things that are bold and worth admiring, like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and Eric Weinstein, even trying to do that's an extremely admirable task that he tries to find a unifying theory, like the work that Einstein did. And even if it fails, it's just an excellent attempt to do something great. And so that's an attempt. And so we need more of those type of people, and we have to help people become like that. And that's not trivial, but I think we have to talk about it and try to bring forth that thing. Another thing, by the way, that I've been thinking about in my future is to start some type of school. I've been thinking about doing the influencer thing, but I also think about it sort of not a school, but just a constellation of a membership thing that you can be part of and start something great, and a place to exchange ideas that you influence by being there yourself and try to do things. But perhaps you want the best minds, but you also want to shape them to some degree to become something extraordinary. But the cultural shift is the essence of that in that case. The cultural shift is extremely important. So there has to be a culture associated to it that is bold and it would probably take time. Peter Thiel made the Thiel Fellowship, and that's, I wonder why he did that and not something else, and what's the loophole, or not the loopholes, but the disadvantages of just having that was the initial idea I had, just have a club and just create a member fee. that's it, and you can just make it great by it becomes some, again, sort of almost narcissistic, but if I think I know what we need, I can be the lecturer there. I can be the inspiring person there, trying to help the people. If I really become an influencer, then that could be a quite good next step. I want to start a club or have a group of people trying to do things and just go to the deep questions of life and where you want to go and focus on that exclusively. But it could be, there's something I could explore more if I want to, and I should. These ideas are probably very good to explore, and like being an influencer, and of course I should also ask myself the thing that when Peter Thiel said that, well, if you have planned to achieve something in 10 years, you should ask yourself why you can't achieve it in 6 months. It possibly takes 10 years, but you should still ask yourself, so it's not your story you make up. It could actually be achieved perhaps in 6 months. So I should ask myself also if it's necessary to be an influencer in order to start that type of company, or is it necessary to start a company in order to get an influencer? Is it really limiting that the corona time is now? Couldn't I do social things couldn't I do social things even if I am even while being sorry, my brain is. But what I said was, why can I? Do I have to do social thing, or do I have to be influencer in order to start like a sort of member company, or do I have to have a member company not to be influencer, or do I have to end of that? Do I even have to meet people in order to be an influencer, or does COVID pandemic really limit me, or could I just budge into just a lot of social interactions and just doing via the internet? And probably the answer is yes. So yeah, I realize I'm starting to get somewhat tired. I've been talking a lot here. I could push through, but I also think it's sound to be somewhat moderate. I have but it's been really interesting to do this for almost 2.5 hours, and I'll conclude with that this was a really, really good thing to do, and I think I will thank myself, and I think I should be extremely fucking proud of what I've just done. So that's something to get a diploma for. No, I'm just kidding. Bye.